48 CE. Spring has just touched Rome. The marble gates of the Palatine Hill Palace open, and a very young girl, only 15, steps inside the grand residence. Her white silk gown clings softly to her frame, and sprigs of myrtle glitter like a crown in her golden hair. As she enters, the senior members of the Senate rise in respect, and the surrounding crowd bursts into applause, almost as if a goddess has descended upon the earth. Standing before her is the ruler of the empire, Claudius, 50 years old, dragging one leg, his speech catching and stumbling as he tries to speak. He reaches out with a trembling hand and takes the delicate fingers of this child bride into his own. His name has been carved into history for centuries, but hers is about to become something else entirely. A shadow Rome tried desperately to erase. Valeria Messalina. Remember the name. Rome wanted the world to forget her. It failed. People believed this young girl would save the empire. The bloodstains from Caligula's madness were still fresh on the palace walls. 4 years of slaughter, cruelty, and depravity so extreme that even ancient historians trembled while recording them. A reign so unhinged that his own guards hacked him to death in a tunnel beneath this very palace. Rome now craved stability, hope, and an heir, and this 15-year-old girl was being presented as that promise. But 10 years later, this same palace would be reshaped by her into something so disturbing that ancient writers hesitated to describe it. Senators who once held their heads high would become prisoners to her whims. Noble daughters would enter her chambers and return silent, eyes dimmed, voices stilled, carrying secrets they would take to their graves. She would host gatherings that would shame even professional courtesans. She would weave blackmail webs so intricate that modern intelligence agencies would pause in disbelief. She would, while still being empress, choose another man and marry him in broad daylight with witnesses, as if daring the entire empire to stop her. Try to stop me, if you can. And when the Roman elite finally rose against her, statues of her would be dragged through the streets and smashed. Her name would be carved out of inscriptions. Official documents would be rewritten as though she had never existed. Damnatio memoriae, the destruction of memory, as if she had never been born. And yet look, 2,000 years later, you are still here, still listening. Why? Because the faces history tries hardest to bury often end up speaking the loudest. So the real question is, what happens when corruption isn't the result of power, but becomes power itself? Now let's rewind. CE. Rome's forum is alive. Merchants shouting about silk, senators arguing over grain, children darting between columns. On the surface, the empire looks invincible, but inside, rot has already set in. Tiberius died 2 years earlier, on the island of Capri, hated, paranoid, utterly alone. Then came Caligula, 4 years of horror in which executions were entertainment. A horse was appointed to the Senate. Senators were forced to watch as he violated their wives at dinner. On January 24th, 41 CE, the Praetorian Guard finally acted. 29 stab wounds ended everything. His wife was killed alongside him, his infant daughter smashed against a wall. Rome exhaled with relief, then panicked. Who would rule now? Searching through the palace, the guards found a trembling man hiding behind a curtain. Claudius, the awkward uncle the family always mocked, stammering, limping, drooling, frail, a man who never imagined ruling anything. But the soldiers needed a figure, a body, a face, a symbol. Whoever was alive was qualified. So Claudius was lifted onto the throne simply to keep Rome from tearing itself apart. Yet he knew he was only a temporary solution, a placeholder in purple. He needed one thing immediately: legitimacy, a dynasty, an heir. So he married his 15-year-old relative, Valeria Messalina, a girl whose bloodline traced back to sacred kings, whose beauty seemed carved from marble, pale-skinned, golden-haired, and exuding the innocence Rome worshipped as purity. The people cheered. The Senate applauded. Rome believed the future was secure again. But no one asked the one question that mattered. What happens when you dress a child as a goddess? When every door opens at her command? When senators bow before her? When her husband is old enough to be her father? When she is told her entire worth lies only in her womb and her obedience? And then you hand her power, but instruct her never to use it. What grows inside her then? Rome was about to learn the answer. And the coming storm wouldn't rise from the battlefield, but from the bedchambers of the palace. Before we go any further, if you're someone who's drawn to the parts of history that textbooks quietly skip, then this is the moment where your like and subscription help us uncover even more buried accounts like this one. Now, back to the story. For the first 2 years, everything appears flawless. Messalina gives birth to a daughter, Claudia Octavia, then a son, Britannicus, named to honor his father's victories in Britain. The Senate, tense and uncertain since Caligula's fall, starts to breathe normally again. The empire finally has heirs. At public events, Messalina appears exactly as Rome expects. A living sculpture of Roman virtue. Her head draped, movements controlled, eyes lowered, every gesture rehearsed to match the ideal of a pure, dignified matron. To the public, she's everything Rome admires. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect empress. But Rome has always divided its women into 2 rigid categories, the matrona and the meretrix, the guardian of the household and the woman of desire, one honored, the other condemned, one sacred, the other forbidden. These 2 worlds were never meant to overlap. Messalina chose to belong to both. The first whisper rises around 42 CE. A senator, returning late from Ostia, decides to spend the night in Rome. With time to spare, a sudden impulse takes him to the Subura, Rome's infamous red light district. Narrow alleys, the smell of cheap wine and urine, dimly lit windows, the kind of place where rich and poor behave exactly the same once the door closes. He selects a room, drops a few coins. The door opens. A woman steps inside. A black wig hiding her hair, charcoal smeared heavily around her eyes, and the thick scent of perfume meant to mask something far more expensive. She turns. Her face comes into the light. His breath stops. He is staring at the Empress of Rome. Not a lookalike. Not a rumor. The real Messalina. Tacitus. Yes, biased in many ways, but connected to people inside the palace, claimed this wasn't a single incident. Messalina allegedly took the working name Lysiska and frequented a brothel run by a woman named Scylla. Not for money, not from despair, but for thrill. Think about that psychology. Every man who recognized her became trapped in her secret. Every man who didn't became an unwitting participant in her game. A web in which every thread tightened around someone else's fear. Roman morality had always been theatre anyway. Senators kept mistresses, generals visited brothels after campaigns. Married men slept with enslaved women, and nobody cared. But a woman, especially the woman symbolizing the empire's purity, she was supposed to be kept inside a glass box. Messalina shattered it with her own hands. Before dawn, she would slip back into the palace, remove the wig, wash off the cheap perfume, dress herself in imperial silk, and stand before the altar of Vesta, the goddess of chastity, with the same serene expression she wore the night before. The brothel, it turned out, was only her testing ground. The real stage was the palace. Picture this, a Roman banquet. The elite recline on silk cushions around low tables, golden platters of honey-glazed dormice, fine wine swirling in gem-studded cups, senators talking politics, generals discussing Britain. Everything polished, cultured, civilized. Then a subtle signal from Messalina. Servants withdraw, doors shut, and new guests step inside. Gladiators still carrying the scent of the arena, actors with grease paint on their faces, foreign captives, and sometimes the teenage sons of noble families, summoned under polite pretexts. Where the story goes next is darker than what we've uncovered so far. What unfolded next is described in ancient sources with a mix of disbelief, dread, and a kind of horrified curiosity. Night after night, scenes took place in the palace that no one dared speak of in daylight. Men of rank were ordered to perform in ways that stripped them of dignity. Senators found themselves paired with rivals, men they hated, men who hated them, and forced to entertain the empress as if they were performers in a private circus. Noble women, married, respected, raised to embody Roman honor, were compelled to play roles that violated everything they had been taught since childhood. Their husbands often stood helpless on the opposite side of the hall, pale and motionless, knowing refusal meant ruin. And the message spread quickly across Rome. The empress does not tolerate the word nomedo, a tribune once declined one of her invitations. 3 days later, his corpse washed ashore on the Tiber. Another aristocrat tried to slip out of an evening gathering early, Before the week ended, his entire estate had been seized. People understood. They complied. Then came the infamous contest. Pliny the Elder, writing decades later, fascinated and horrified, recorded the story of a challenge between Messalina and a celebrated courtesan named Sylla. No money was involved. It was about dominance, about proving who commanded greater stamina over a single night. Sylla managed 25 partners. Messalina went one more. Pliny wrote it with the cold precision of a man documenting a natural phenomenon he can't fully comprehend. Whether exaggerated or accurate, the tale survived because it captured what Romans themselves could not express. A woman using sexuality not as submission, but as authority. Rome had no language for a woman like that, so they turned her into legend and into a warning. Slowly, the palace transformed into a stage where humiliation was the price of influence. High-ranking officials arrived before sunrise to beg for political favor and left after midnight, having done things they would never dare whisper to their closest confidants. Prestigious families sent their daughters into Messalina's private quarters, praying they would return unscathed. Most did, some did not, and no one asked questions. Everyone understood that silence was survival. Messalina didn't merely hold power, she accumulated it. She harvested secrets, guilt, and fear. She built a network so tightly woven that anyone who tried to move against her would doom themselves in the process. Every person who entered her circle became trapped. Every witness became a participant. Every participant became bound to her forever. She did not need loyalty. She owned something far stronger, their shame. Loyalty shifts with time. Shame buries itself in the bones and never leaves. While all this unfolded, Claudius continued governing, repairing aqueducts, trying court reforms, pushing Rome's borders into Britain, slowly proving himself far more capable than anyone had predicted. Did he know what was happening under his own roof? Of course he did. Rome gossiped like a living creature. Senators whispered. Freedmen pleaded with him to intervene. But what could he do? Messalina was the mother of his children. Accusing her meant admitting to the entire empire that the emperor had been humiliated. It meant potential revolt. It meant confirming what critics had always said, that he was too weak to control his own wife, let alone Rome. So Claudius chose the same path countless powerful men have walked when confronted with truths too painful to face. He pretended not to see. He buried himself in work. He told himself the stories were exaggerated. He waited, hoping the storm would pass. But storms don't pass. They break. And in 48 CE, a full decade after their wedding, everything snaps. It is autumn. Claudius is in Ostia, personally supervising Rome's grain supply, work so vital that one mistake could send the city into chaos. Egyptian wheat kept the empire alive, and he took the responsibility seriously. While he is away, the ground beneath the palace begins to shake, and the end begins. While Claudius is away handling Rome's grain crisis in Ostia, something unthinkable unfolds back in the capital. Messalina, still legally the Empress of Rome, stands in front of witnesses and marries Gaius Silius, the most influential senator of his generation. Young, striking, politically unstoppable, everything her husband is not. And the most shocking part, she doesn't try to hide it. No secrecy, no shadows, no excuses. It's a full public ceremony. Priests, guests, formal vows, signed documents. A wedding, held by a woman who is already married to the emperor. Ancient historians describe the moment with disbelief, as if Rome itself stopped breathing. Tacitus writes that the crowd looked on, frozen, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. An empress openly taking a second husband in broad daylight, as though laws, loyalty, and imperial authority no longer had any power over her. Why did she do it? Was she attempting a political takeover? Did she believe Claudius was too timid to challenge her? Did Silius imagine he could become emperor simply by marrying the emperor's wife? Or had Messalina reached a psychological point where the danger itself was the pleasure? Where breaking the rules mattered more than hiding it? Her motives are lost to time. Her actions are not. And for the first time, corrupt and exhausted Rome finally reached its breaking point. Narcissus, Claudius's most trusted freedman, hears the news first. He races to Ostia and finds the emperor buried in grain reports. Now imagine being the one forced to deliver that message. How do you tell a ruler that his wife has publicly married another man? How do you convince him it's real when it sounds like madness? But the confirmations start pouring in. Senators, witnesses, every piece of evidence identical. The marriage contract had been signed, legally, publicly, undeniably. No rumor, no misunderstanding, no way to look away anymore. Picture Claudius in that moment. The quiet scholar emperor everyone mocked. The man who survived by being overlooked, now humiliated not privately, but officially. While he was protecting Rome from famine, his wife was binding herself to another man in front of the city. The fury that hits him isn't explosive. It's icy, final. He heads back to Rome with the Praetorian Guard at his side. They find Messalina in the gardens of Lucullus, a massive estate overflowing with exotic trees, glittering fountains, and the luxury where she'd hosted many of her infamous gatherings. She's with her mother, Lepida, who is pleading with her daughter to run, to speak, to fight for her life. But Messalina seems paralyzed. Some historians say she tried writing a plea for mercy, others say she just stood there, numb, unable to believe the game was finally over, that after a decade of bending Rome to her will, Rome had finally pushed back. The soldiers approach. She recognizes their faces. Some had guarded her halls, responded to her summons, perhaps even benefited from her favors. Now they come as executioners. She collapses to her knees. She begs. She offers her children, Octavia and Britannicus, only 9 and 7, as bargaining chips. Anything to live. The guards remain silent. Orders are not negotiable. Desperate, she grasps a dagger, maybe her mother's, maybe a soldier's, and raises it to her throat. Her hands tremble. She cannot finish it. A tribune steps forward. His name was never preserved, but his act was. He drives the blade home. Messalina, once Augusta, Empress of Rome, the woman who terrified senators and reshaped the palace with her desires, dies at 25, bleeding on the grass of the gardens where she once ruled over the elite like a queen of her own private empire. Claudius issued the final blow the Roman state could deliver, damnatio memoriae, the erasure of a life through destruction, not death. Her marble likenesses were hauled from their pedestals, dragged along the cobblestones, and smashed to fragments. Stonecutters scraped her name from monuments, from archives, from every public record that dared to acknowledge she once walked among them. The decree was simple. She never existed. But here we are, 2 millennia later, still telling her story. You've just witnessed the downfall of an empress, not brought down by an invading army or a devastating illness, but undone by the very power she wielded without restraint. If tales like this remind you why history must be confronted, not censored, consider staying with us. The past doesn't vanish, it reverberates. The Roman Forum still towers above the crowds. The Colosseum still draws millions, but the Palatine Hill, the heart of imperial Rome, the place where Messalina ruled and unraveled, stands mostly in ruins now. Tourists stroll through shattered pillars, stare at worn plaques about Augustus and Nero, never realizing they're standing in the very gardens where she once held Rome's elite in the palm of her hand. Claudius remarried within months. His own niece, Agrippina the Younger, shrewder than Messalina, colder, patient to the point of calculation, she would one day poison Claudius and elevate her son Nero to the throne, igniting yet another era of blood and chaos. Messalina's children did not escape the tragedy that consumed her name. Her daughter, Octavia, was forced to marry Nero, her own stepbrother. Years later, he accused her of infidelity and ordered her execution. She died at 22, the same age her mother met her fate. Her son Britannicus fared no better. At 14, he collapsed during a dinner banquet, poisoned, almost certainly on Nero's orders, to remove any challenge to imperial succession. The Senate pretended Messalina had never lived, but people remembered. The palace slaves remembered the whispers. Soldiers remembered the night processions. Families remembered the daughters who walked into her villa and returned. Different. Rome can erase names. It cannot erase memory. And here is the question that still unsettles historians. How much of what we know about Messalina is true? Our sources, Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, were all men writing long after she was gone. All had political motives. All operated within a culture that followed a very predictable pattern. When a woman became too powerful, accuse her of sexual corruption. Cleopatra, Agrippina, Livia, Messalina. The accusations were always the same. Does that make her innocent? No. The marriage to Silius genuinely happened, Even her defenders admit that. The political maneuvering was real. The intimidation, the blackmail, the dangerous alliances, those left marks in Rome's records. But the brothel tales, the numbers, the lurid competitions, we will never know where fact ends and the smear campaign begins. Here is what we can say with certainty. A girl barely 15 was bound to a man more than 3 decades older. She was told her entire worth lay in her chastity, her fertility, and the appearance of virtue. She was thrust into unimaginable influence without guidance, purpose, or support, and when she sought power in the only ways available to her, by subverting the very hypocrisy Rome built around its women, the empire that molded her destroyed her, then spent 2,000 years calling her a monster. Walk the ruined halls of the Palatine today, and you can feel something lingering. Not ghosts, not myths, but the weight of stories that refused to die even when Rome tried to bury them under stone. Because here is the truth about damnatio memoriae. It never works. You can smash statues, you can scrub inscriptions, you can rewrite every scroll in the archives, but you cannot erase the echo. Messalina's name was meant to disappear. Instead, it became a legend. Not because Rome wanted her remembered, but because truth, however distorted or buried, always claws its way back into the light. Empires collapse for many reasons: invading armies, famine, bankruptcy. But Rome left behind a darker lesson. A civilization can crumble from the inside long before an enemy touches its walls. Messalina's story is not simply a tale of lust or palace drama. It is a study of what happens when influence turns into a weapon, when shame becomes leverage, and when those entrusted with safeguarding a nation become too compromised to stop its decay. Every senator she humiliated chose silence. Every commander she manipulated chose obedience. Every witness who stepped into her private world became trapped by their own fear, not out of loyalty, but because she held the power to expose them. She demonstrated a truth Rome refused to admit. You don't need legions to control powerful men. You only need to know what they pray the public never discovers. We like to believe modern systems are different, that we've outgrown the corruption that poisoned ancient empires. But look closer at any present-day power structure, any government, corporation, or ruling class. How many hidden scandals are holding them together? How many careers survive because too many people are afraid to speak? How much of what we call stability is really just shared fear? Messalina's ghost does not linger on the Palatine Hill. It haunts every place where authority and shame lie beside each other. A century after her death, Marcus Aurelius wrote a warning while trying to understand Rome's endless cycle of virtue and vice. Look beneath the surface. Do not let the true nature of things escape you. He was speaking about leaders who shined in public but decayed in private, people exactly like her. But he might as well have been warning us today. Because the message is not that Messalina was unique in her cruelty. The message is that Rome built her. They married a 15-year-old girl to a man in his 50s. They told her she existed only for purity and childbirth. They gave her enormous influence but no purpose, no guidance, no boundaries. And when she finally wielded that power in ways that exposed Rome's hypocrisy, the empire that crafted her destroyed her and spent 2 millennia painting her as a monster. Her memory was erased. Her life, however twisted and distorted, survived, and after 2,000 years, we're still trying to understand what her rise and fall says about authority, corruption, and the fragility of empires. You've just walked through one of history's darkest mirrors, a story Rome tried to bury, but never could. Her tale refused to die. Even after 2 millennia, we're still grappling with the same haunting question. What happens when the very people trusted to guard virtue become the ones who tear it apart? You've just walked through one of history's darkest corridors, a chapter Rome tried desperately to seal away, yet could never silence. And if stories like this remind you just how delicate empires truly are, how authority twists, deforms, and rots in the shadows, then you're beginning to understand why we keep digging into the past. Because corruption isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides behind marble pillars, sacred titles, and polished reputations. If uncovering these forgotten truths opens your eyes to how easily power can poison, then make sure to join us here at Dark History Unleashed. Help keep these buried lessons alive, because the moment we stop remembering them is the moment we begin repeating them.